The first week we looked at Jesus saying, "Come to me and rest. Come to me and lay down all of these lists of things, all of these pressures, all of these expectations, both internal and external, that keep you busy and harried and anxious and worried. Come to me and rest." We looked last week as he said, "I have come to call sinners." And then he invited his disciples to begin to pray that the Lord of the harvest would send workers into his harvest field. Jesus said, "I came to call sinners," and he looked at his disciples and said, "Come join me. Come join me as I call sinners." This morning, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 to 33, where Jesus says to Peter, "Come, walk on the water. Come out on the water with me." Let's read this together. This morning, if you've got a Bible, turn there and read along as I read out loud. Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought him all their sick and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. Jesus and his disciples had been busy. They had been really busy. And if you read this whole chapter, if you read what's going on around these events, they had been extremely busy, and they had been facing difficulty. John the Baptist was beheaded, and that had an impact on his disciples. That had an impact on them, had an impact on John's disciples, and we know that some of Jesus' disciples had been followers of John the Baptist before they began to follow Jesus. John the Baptist was beheaded, and then Jesus took his disciples by boat privately to a solitary place to get away for a little bit, to come away and rest. But everybody knew where he was going, so they all followed him. They all ran to get there ahead of him. And when Jesus saw this crowd in front of him, he said, "Oh, go home." No, he didn't. Never, not once. When he saw this crowd, he taught them. He had compassion on them. He spoke to them. And when they were hungry, he said to his disciples, "You give them something to eat." And they fed 5,000 that day. When that time was done, Jesus put his disciples in a boat and said, Go on ahead of me. I'll catch up with you." And Jesus went up on the mountain to pray. Because Jesus was tired. You ever had one of those weeks? Have you ever had one of those weeks where something major happens in your life and then you try to get some time for yourself and it gets interrupted and you serve those people and then finally you get a moment of peace. Finally you get a moment of peace and Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray. It was his time to refresh himself. It was time for him to spend reconnecting with the Father at the end of a day, at the end of a week that was really difficult. The disciples were in the boat, and it says that the boat was a considerable distance from land, but it was being buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So we've got Jesus who is finally getting a moment of peace to himself. But where are the disciples? They're in a boat. Jesus isn't with them. They've had this week too, where John the Baptist was beheaded, where they tried to get away with Jesus, and then this crowd was there, and they were a little resentful of the crowd, and then they fed them, and it was miraculous. It was wonderful. God did a great thing by feeding these people, and they were a part of it, but they're tired too. And they're in a boat, and they're not making the progress that they want to make because they're being pushed back by the waves, and the wind is against them. Sometimes I think we have that week too. Sometimes we have those days where we feel like I'm not making the progress that I want to make in whatever area of your life. You've got a goal in mind, you've got a location you want to be, but it just feels like the wind is against you. It just feels like you're not making the progress that you want to make. It says during the fourth watch of the night then, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. He could have met him on the other side. There are a lot of ways this story could have played out. He didn't have to come to them on the water. He could have gotten a nap in and still beat him to the other side of the shore, because he's Jesus. But instead, in the middle of their frustration, in the middle of their exhaustion, he comes out on the water to them, walking through these waves that are slowing their boat down. They don't seem to be bothering Jesus. He's just coming. And they see Jesus approaching, and they freaked out, because who wouldn't? You're in the middle of a lake, and there's something out there on top of the water, and it's moving towards you. I think I would be afraid, just like they were afraid. I don't know if I would think it was a ghost, because I'm not real into ghosts, but it's understandable. They said, here is this supernatural thing moving towards us. Jesus calls out to them and says, oh, hush, you're fine. It's me. It's me. Take courage. It's I. It's Jesus. Don't be afraid. And Peter's just Peter. Peter looks out at Jesus and he says, hey, if it's you, I want to do that too. Hey, if that's you, if that's really you, Jesus, you tell me, ask me to come out on the water with you. I'll come with you. I'm tired of being in this boat with these stinky guys. Tired of being in this boat that's not getting anywhere. If it's you, Jesus, if you're really doing this thing, call to me and ask me to come out on the water to you. And Jesus says one word. He just says, well, come. Come. That Peter does this amazing thing He does. He does. Here is Jesus doing this impossible thing. It's an impossible thing for human feet to walk on water. It's impossible. If you wanted to know the science of it, it's a whole thing about surface area to volume ratio and weight distribution and surface tension of the water. There are bugs that can do it, but we can't. Jesus is doing this impossible thing. And Peter says, I want to do that too. I want to join you in doing the impossible, Jesus. And Jesus says, come. And Peter takes him at his word and he gets out of the boat. Have you ever witnessed God doing something incredible? Whether it's in your own life or the life of someone you love or someone across the world, and said, wow, that's amazing. I wish I could be a part of that. But how many of us are brave enough, or maybe perhaps foolish enough, to say, God, what you're doing is amazing. I want to join you. Invite me to come. And then if God invites, how many of us are brave enough or foolish enough to step out of the boat and walk on the water? Not all the disciples did. In fact, I bet they were kind of going, Peter, this is a new level for you. You are taking it, that next step. Thank you, I will sit here in this boat. Peter said, call me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. And Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water. He did it. He did it. He walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But then he saw the wind. I've never seen the wind. Have you ever seen the wind? I've seen the wind do things, right? I've seen the wind do incredible things. I've seen the wind fly kites high up into the sky. I've ridden on the wind, literally in an airplane, flying across the country and around the world. I've seen the wind do things, but I've never seen the wind. And I wonder if when Peter was looking around, he saw the wind blowing the waves. I wonder if he saw the wind ruffling Jesus' robe. And he went, oh, what did I get myself into? Oh, what am I doing out here? Thinking I could do the impossible. He took his eyes off Jesus. He saw the wind, and he was afraid. I've been afraid of the wind. Any other lifelong Kansans out there who have been afraid of the wind from time to time? Wow. The wind can do incredible things. The wind can cause incredible damage. I was watching a documentary on the Joplin tornado that was a mile wide and stayed on the ground for a really long time. 22-mile path of destruction. A mile wide. The wind can do incredible damage. Peter, while Peter was impulsive, Peter wasn't a fool. Peter knew that wind could do damage. He was a fisherman. I would imagine he had seen the wind do some pretty big damage too. To boats, to sails, capsizing fishermen in their boats. He was afraid, and he started to sink. And he cried out to Jesus, Lord, save me. I don't know that I read that right. I think it should probably go like, Jesus, help me! I bet he wasn't calm at all. Lord, save me. And Jesus said, no. Get yourself up out of that water. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. Jesus reached out immediately, Matthew says. Now, in the Gospel of Mark, if we saw the word immediately, it just would be part of the background, because that's what Mark says all the time. Immediately Jesus went here, and then directly they went there, and immediately this happened, and suddenly that happened. That's the Gospel of Mark. But in Matthew, when it says immediately, Matthew means it. Peter said, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. I don't know if Peter was up to his ankles or up to his knees or up to his waist, or I don't know how far down he'd sunk into that water. But as soon as he asked for help, Jesus' hand was there. Hold him back up. You of little faith. Some people read that, and they read that as a chastisement. They read that as a rebuke or a correction. But when I read those words, I imagine Jesus had a smile on his face. Come on, silly. You were just walking on the water. Oh, you of little faith. Come on, Peter. Why did you doubt? It's not a rebuke. It's not a rebuke. It's a reminder. It's not a rebuke. It's a reminder. Peter remembered, seconds ago you were walking on the water. Why did you doubt? You ever seen a kid riding their bike for the first time? When do they fall over? When they start doubting themselves. When they go, oh no, I can't do this. And then the next thing you know, they're on the tarmac. Oh, you of little faith. You were going strong. You were doing great. Why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? And when they climbed back into the boat, the wind died down. The wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. When we look around us in the world and we see God doing impossible things, and I don't think it takes long if we open our eyes for us to look around and see God doing impossible things. I believe God wants us to say to him, God, if that really is you, invite me to join you, because I want to do that too. I want to do that too. I want to walk on the water with you. I want to feed the hungry with you. I want to heal the sick with you. I want to walk into troubled lives and leave them healthier and more whole. God, if that's you at work, invite me to join you. When God is doing impossible things, and when we see God doing impossible things, sometimes we need a little Peter, a little Peter in our soul that will say to Jesus, let me join you. Let me join you. Because I believe that Jesus had so much joy in his heart when he said to Peter, come. Come. And Peter stepped out of the boat. God is doing new and impossible things around us. And if we think he's not, we're wrong. Okay? We need to open our eyes. Ask God to open your eyes and say, show me where you're doing new and impossible things. When God is doing those new and impossible things, Jesus invites us to follow him. Come. come. Come and join me. And if we're willing, God will not only call us to join him in doing impossible things, but then when we doubt, he's right there. When we fall down, he's right there. When we have difficulty, he's still there. And we find new ways in which Jesus is the Son of God. We find new ways in which God is the healer and the redeemer and the savior of the world. That's how we learn about him, is by doing with him, being with him, saying, yes, I will come, and stepping out of the boat.